I didn't realize how serious things had become until the night I couldn't sleep in my own house. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation and every look that had been thrown my way. Something felt wrong, but I kept telling myself it was normal adjustment, that marriage always came with challenges. Still, deep down, I felt like I was slowly disappearing. At first, the expectations were small. I was told how to greet elders, when to speak, and when to stay quiet. I tried to be respectful because I wanted peace. I wanted my marriage to work. Each time I adjusted, I thought that would be the last demand. I was wrong. Every time I gave in, something new was added. It was never enough. What hurt the most was how alone I felt. I expected my husband to notice my silence growing heavier. Instead, he kept asking me to be patient, to endure a little longer. His words sounded gentle, but they pushed all the weight onto me. I started to feel like my feelings didn't matter, as if keeping everyone else comfortable was more important than my well-being. The house no longer felt warm. Conversations would stop when I entered a room. Smiles felt forced. I could sense judgment in the air, even when no one said anything. I started questioning myself, wondering if I was too sensitive or if I was doing something wrong. That confusion was exhausting. It drained me more than the open criticism ever could. One evening, I finally spoke up. Not angrily, not disrespectfully, just honestly. I said I needed space to breathe and to be treated with basic respect. The room went quiet in a way that made my chest tighten. No one shouted. No one argued. Instead, I was met with cold stares and calm voices that carried a warning. That was when I understood that my honesty had crossed a line they didn't want challenged. After that moment, everything shifted. I wasn't openly confronted right away, but the atmosphere became heavier. I was watched more closely. My words were twisted. My silence was treated as guilt. I realized then that this wasn't about misunderstandings anymore. It was about control. I began to see patterns I had ignored before. How decisions were made without me. How my discomfort was dismissed as rebellion. How loyalty was expected from me, but never offered in return. That realization was painful, but it also gave me clarity. For the first time since my wedding, I stopped blaming myself. I understood that love should not require losing your voice. Respect should not feel like fear. And peace should never come at the cost of your dignity. That night, as I sat alone with my thoughts, I knew something had changed inside me. I didn't know how things would unfold, but I knew I could no longer pretend everything was fine. Marriage was supposed to feel like building a life together, but mine felt more like stepping into a role that had already been written for me. Each day came with quiet instructions I was expected to follow without question. No one shouted orders, yet the rules were clear. I was told how to respond to greetings, how to sit during family visits, and how quickly I should move when someone needed something. Even my tone of voice was corrected if it sounded too confident. I tried to adapt because I believed effort would earn acceptance. I changed how I dressed, choosing clothes that made me less noticeable. I watched my words carefully, afraid that saying the wrong thing would cause tension. Serving others became less about kindness and more about proving I belonged. The more I tried to fit in, the less I recognized myself. Daniel noticed the changes but never fully addressed them. When I tried to explain how overwhelmed I felt, he brushed it off gently. He said his family was traditional and that peace required patience. He reminded me that arguments would only make things harder. His solution was always the same: endure a little longer, stay quiet, don't react. Each time he said it, I felt my role in the marriage shrink. Slowly, decisions stopped including me. Plans were made without my input, even when they affected my daily life. I was informed instead of consulted. When I questioned it, I was told it was normal and that I would get used to it. I began to feel like I was borrowing space in my own home rather than living in it. There were moments when I caught myself asking permission for things that never required approval before. That realization scared me. I had entered the marriage as an independent person, yet I was becoming cautious and unsure. My confidence faded quietly, without anyone needing to raise their voice. Family gatherings made the feeling stronger. I moved around the house like a helper rather than a wife. Conversations flowed around me, rarely including me. When I did speak, the room would fall awkwardly silent, as if I had overstepped. Daniel rarely stepped in. His silence felt heavier than any criticism. At night, when everything was quiet, I wondered when things had changed so much. I missed the version of myself who laughed freely and spoke without fear. I realized that loyalty in my marriage was already being measured, and it wasn't about love. It was about how much of myself I was willing to give up to keep everyone else comfortable. I never thought the first real betrayal would come from the person I trusted most. One afternoon, I mentioned to Daniel how anxious I felt about a family gathering. I spoke quietly, thinking it was private, hoping he would understand and reassure me. Later that day, I heard the exact words I had shared being repeated by his mother and aunts as if I had said them aloud to the entire household. My stomach sank. I felt exposed and small, realizing that the person I leaned on had given away my fears. At first, I wasn't sure if I had imagined it. But as more conversations I had shared in confidence appeared in casual remarks around the house, the truth became undeniable. Daniel had been repeating my private thoughts to gain favor with his family. Each time I confronted him, he tried to explain it away, saying he only wanted to smooth things over or help them understand me better. But it wasn't helping me, it was making me feel like I didn't matter, like my feelings were just tools for someone else's approval. The realization hit harder than any argument could. I had trusted him completely, and he had chosen loyalty to his family over honesty to me. I felt trapped, caught between a man I loved and a family whose approval came at the cost of my dignity. The betrayal was quiet but sharp, and it left a mark that I couldn't ignore. I began to notice how often my words, my fears, even my jokes, were being repeated or twisted. I had thought marriage meant protecting each other, but I was learning it could also mean being used without realizing it. When I confronted Daniel, I kept my voice steady, even though anger and disappointment were bubbling inside me. I asked why he had shared things that were private, why he hadn't stood up for me when his family crossed boundaries. His response made my heart sink further. He didn't deny it fully, but he minimized it, saying it was better this way and that I needed to understand family comes first. It was a lesson in control disguised as tradition, and I felt powerless to stop it. That night, lying awake, I thought about what trust really meant. I realized that protecting someone wasn't just about keeping them safe from the world, it was about defending them from the people closest to them, even if that included your spouse. I began to understand that change couldn't come from pleading or explaining. If I wanted my voice, my dignity, and my peace, I would have to find a way to stand firm, no matter how quiet or small my actions seemed at first. The first betrayal had opened my eyes, and I knew the path ahead would test every ounce of strength I had. The day of the family gathering, I tried to keep calm. I had dressed carefully, followed every unspoken rule, and hoped this time I would be accepted. But as soon as I entered the room, I could feel the tension. Eyes followed me, whispers floated around, and the smiles felt forced. I realized too late that appearances didn't matter, obedience did. It started subtly. A comment here, a sharp glance there, all under the guise of tradition. Then it escalated. One of the Umuada, a stern older woman I barely knew, suddenly accused me of disrespect during a small disagreement from weeks earlier. I was stunned. I hadn't acted disrespectfully. I hadn't even spoken in that moment. Yet there I was, being made to feel guilty in front of everyone. They told me to apologize immediately, as if acknowledging a crime I didn't commit would restore balance. I hesitated, hoping Daniel would step in. But he didn't. He stayed silent, his eyes on the floor, avoiding mine. That silence felt heavier than any words of blame. I realized that silence, in this family, wasn't peace, it was approval of control. I watched the other women nod and smile, framing my apology as respect, but I saw the truth beneath it. They weren't teaching me respect, they were teaching me obedience. Every word I was forced to say, every nod I was forced to give, chipped away at my confidence. I felt exposed and humiliated, and yet I had to remain calm. Any outburst would be proof, in their eyes, that I was rebellious and undeserving of trust. It was a turning point. Until that moment, I had been confused, wondering if I was overreacting, questioning if I was imagining the pressure. But standing there, forced to apologize for something I hadn't done while everyone watched, I finally understood. This wasn't about family harmony or tradition. It was about control. They wanted to see how far they could push me, how much I would give up before I stopped resisting. I felt a quiet anger rising, but I held it in. I couldn't let them see the hurt, they would mistake it for weakness. I realized that understanding the truth was more powerful than shouting or arguing. I began to notice the patterns I hadn't seen before, the way every lesson disguised as tradition was actually a test of my limits. I understood that clarity didn't come from confronting them immediately. It came from observing, listening, and preparing. That night, after everyone left, I reflected on what had happened. I felt a mix of shame and relief, shame for having been put in that position, relief for finally seeing the reality of their control. I knew the path forward wouldn't be easy. I couldn't trust silence or tradition to protect me. I had to rely on my own strength, my own strategy, and my own voice to reclaim the life that was slowly being taken from me. It was the first moment I truly stopped being confused. I saw clearly who they were and what they wanted, and that clarity would guide every choice I made from that point on. A few days after the humiliating gathering, one of the Umuada asked to speak with me privately. I followed her into a quiet room, my heart pounding, unsure what this meeting would bring. As soon as the door closed, she got straight to the point. Her voice was calm but firm. She told me that I had a choice: submit completely to their rules, follow every expectation without question, or leave the marriage quietly and take nothing. She said Daniel would move on easily if I chose to leave. He would be fine. She made it clear that resistance would only make my life harder and that their control over the household was absolute. There was no negotiation, no compromise. I felt the weight of the ultimatum press against me, but I refused to show fear. Instead of reacting with anger or pleading, I stayed calm. I nodded, listened carefully, and asked questions only to clarify their intentions. Their goal was to see me break, to make me panic, but I decided that giving them that satisfaction would serve no purpose. My mind began working quietly, analyzing every word, every threat, and every hint of weakness in their approach. For the first time, I saw the situation clearly. I realized this ultimatum wasn't just about obedience, it was a test. They wanted to see if I could be intimidated, if I would accept a life where my voice and choices didn't matter. I understood that they underestimated me. They believed that fear and pressure could make me bend, but they didn't know I had learned to hold back my reactions, to observe, and to plan. That night, I sat alone and thought about my options. I could submit and lose myself, or I could leave quietly and be defeated without a fight. Neither choice felt right, so I decided on a third way: patience and strategy. I would not rush. I would not let them see my next move. I would gather information, understand the family's patterns, and find a way to reclaim control without destroying myself in the process. I began noticing small details I had overlooked before: the way the Umuada coordinated their influence, the moments Daniel failed to defend me, the expectations they assumed I would accept. Each observation added a piece to the plan forming in my mind. I realized that power didn't always come from shouting or confronting. Sometimes, power came from silence, from patience, and from knowing the truth while others remained blind to it. That ultimatum, meant to scare me, became the moment I decided to fight quietly. I would not let fear control my life or my marriage. I would survive this, not by rushing into conflict, but by understanding the battlefield and preparing to move at the right moment. The quiet strategy one began that day would shape everything that followed. I knew the path ahead would test me, but I also knew I was no longer the same fearful woman who had walked into this house months ago. After the ultimatum, I started paying closer attention to everything around me. I noticed little things that didn't make sense before: bills that weren't explained, decisions about money that never included me, and casual remarks from the family that hinted at secrets I wasn't supposed to know. The more I observed, the clearer it became that Daniel and his family were hiding more than just expectations. They were hiding control, lies, and manipulation. I found evidence of financial decisions made without my knowledge. Accounts I had no access to, money being moved quietly, and plans for our future that were already decided by them. It wasn't just that I was left out, it was that they had planned my life without asking, assuming I would comply. That realization hit hard. I understood then that my role wasn't as a partner but as someone they could manage. Beyond money, I began piecing together stories Daniel had told me that didn't match what others remembered. Friends, neighbors, and even distant relatives confirmed versions of events that contradicted his words. I realized I had been fed half-truths and reassurances while the real decisions and manipulations happened behind my back. Each discovery chipped away at the trust one had left, but it also gave me clarity. I could see the pattern now: control through lies and careful planning. I also learned about past relationships Daniel's family had influenced. Former partners were pressured, humiliated, or pushed away quietly. I realized I was following the same path they had set for others, meant to fit a mold, not to live as an equal. That knowledge angered me, but I forced myself to stay calm. Rage would only make me reckless, and I needed strategy. Instead of confronting Daniel or the family immediately, I decided to gather facts. I documented financial records, collected witness accounts, and wrote down inconsistencies in conversations and events. I wanted to be certain of everything before I made a move. Patience became my tool, and careful observation became my strength. I understood that exposing them too early could backfire, but letting the truth accumulate quietly gave me power they wouldn't see coming. Night after night, I reviewed what I had learned. Each detail, each lie, each manipulation became part of a bigger picture. I started to feel a sense of control returning, even though the house itself still felt like a trap. Knowing the truth, having evidence, and understanding how they operated made me stronger. I no longer felt like a victim, I felt like someone preparing for the moment to reclaim what had been taken. By the time I finished gathering everything, I knew I had more than enough to protect myself and reveal the truth when the moment was right. Patience, silence, and careful planning had turned the betrayal into a tool for my eventual victory. I understood now that rushing into confrontation would only weaken me, but waiting, observing, and preparing quietly would allow me to strike from a position of undeniable strength. As the days passed, I noticed a change in Daniel. He was colder, quieter, distant in ways that made me feel invisible, but he also seemed to assume I had given up. I didn't argue, I didn't complain, and I didn't push back. I simply observed. I watched his tone, his gestures, and the small ways he tried to assert control, thinking I would fold. The more I stayed silent, the more careless the Umuada became. They no longer hid their true intentions. Conversations I once wouldn't have heard now happened right in front of me. They spoke openly about how I was being tested, how my submission was expected, and how easily they assumed I could be managed. At first, I felt anger bubble up, but I didn't let it show. I knew that their confidence was their weakness. I started noticing little slips, contradictions in their words, moments where they underestimated me, and the tiny ways their plans depended on my compliance. Each detail I collected was like a piece of a puzzle forming in my mind. I realized that silence could be more powerful than shouting. While they assumed my quiet meant surrender, it actually meant I was learning, calculating, and preparing. Daniel's distance became even more apparent during meals and family gatherings. He would glance at me, expecting me to flinch, but I didn't. I maintained a calm presence, showing neither fear nor anger. The Umuada continued to discuss their plans as if I wasn't there, giving away strategies and exposing their manipulations without knowing that I was listening, remembering, and analyzing. I also observed how they coordinated their influence, how they pressured Daniel, how they framed my compliance as respect, and how they measured his loyalty through my behavior. It was all laid bare because I refused to react. Each careless word and each assumption they made gave me more insight into their control. I realized that the louder and more forceful they tried to appear, the more fragile their position actually was. By watching silently, I began to see the true picture. I had been underestimated at every step. Their power depended on fear and compliance, and I was slowly stripping that power away just by staying aware and calm. I didn't need to argue or fight yet, I only needed to hold my ground and collect evidence of their mistakes and manipulation. That period of quiet observation taught me an important lesson. Sometimes the strongest presence is not in confrontation, but in stillness. By keeping my eyes and ears open, I gained a position no one expected. Their masks, politeness, tradition, and control were slipping, and when the time came, I would be ready to act. The more careless they became, the more prepared I was to reclaim what was mine, not with anger, but with undeniable truth and strategy. The day I decided to act, I felt calm but determined. I had spent weeks gathering every detail, every document, and every witness account I could find. I knew the moment had to be right, when denial was impossible, when the truth could stand on its own without argument. I wasn't seeking revenge through anger or humiliation. I wanted only clarity and fairness, and I wanted to reclaim control over my life. I called a meeting with Daniel and the Umuada. I spoke clearly, presenting financial records that showed how decisions had been made without me, pointing out contradictions in past conversations, and sharing witness accounts that confirmed the manipulations I had uncovered. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg or plead. I simply laid out the facts, piece by piece, letting them speak for themselves. At first, the room was quiet, almost stunned. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair, realizing that the careful story he had told no longer held. He couldn't explain the evidence away or blame me for misunderstanding. His complicity was clear. He wasn't confused or misled, he had been part of the control from the beginning. The Umuada, who had seemed so confident for so long, began to lose their composure. Their polite smiles faltered, their calm tones wavered. They had assumed I was powerless, that I would follow their rules silently, and that Daniel would protect their influence. But the truth didn't care about assumptions. It was concrete, undeniable, and inescapable. I noticed small signs of panic in their behavior. One of the women tried to interrupt, but I continued speaking, refusing to be swayed or distracted. I could see it in their eyes, they hadn't expected this. They had underestimated me because I hadn't reacted with anger or desperation. That quiet patience, that careful observation, had given me the advantage. Daniel looked at me, finally aware of the full extent of what had been uncovered. I didn't need to point it out, I only needed to present the truth. The room shifted entirely. Control had moved from them to me, not through loud confrontation, but through facts and clarity. I could feel the power in knowing the full story and refusing to be intimidated by those who had tried to define my place. By the end of the meeting, it was clear, I had dismantled the control they had over me. I hadn't screamed, I hadn't begged, and I hadn't retaliated with cruelty. I had simply prepared, observed, and acted at the right moment. The Umuada had underestimated me at every step, and Daniel had failed to protect me, but their confidence had become their weakness. That moment was more than just exposing lies. It was reclaiming my voice, my dignity, and my freedom. I realized then that the greatest power often lies not in confrontation, but in patience, strategy, and calm determination. The house, the family, and the marriage had shifted, and for the first time I felt truly in control of my life. After I revealed the truth, I realized something important: this marriage was never going to be equal or safe for me. I could stay and argue, try to rebuild trust, or I could leave on my own terms. I chose to leave. Not angrily, not bitterly, but firmly, with my dignity intact. I wasn't begging for fairness or pleading to be understood. I was reclaiming my life. I packed my things quietly, taking only what I needed. I didn't need a dramatic scene or a confrontation. I had already shown the truth, and now it was time to act. Daniel didn't try to stop me. He looked shocked, unsure how to respond, realizing too late that he had lost more than a wife. He had lost respect, trust, and stability. The life he thought he controlled had slipped from his hands, and he had no one to blame but himself. The Umuada, who had acted so confident and controlling, were left exposed as well. They had underestimated me at every turn. Their manipulation, their attempts to control me, their sense of power, all of it had crumbled. They couldn't rewrite the narrative they once believed they owned. I walked away knowing that I had taken back control, and that their influence over me was finished. Walking out wasn't just a physical act. It was emotional and mental. I felt lighter, freer, and stronger than I had in months. I didn't look back, because I didn't need to. The truth had already spoken for me. I didn't have to explain my decisions, justify my feelings, or apologize for wanting respect and honesty. I had done what was necessary to protect myself. As I left the house, I thought about the lessons I had learned. Patience, observation, and strategy had been my tools. I had faced betrayal and humiliation, but I hadn't let them break me. I had faced manipulation and deceit, but I hadn't lost myself. Every step I took away from that house was a step toward reclaiming my confidence, my voice, and my future. I didn't need to return to prove a point. I didn't need revenge through anger or cruelty. Leaving with my head held high, leaving with clarity and calm, was the strongest statement I could make. I was no longer a guest in my own life or a pawn in someone else's game. I had walked away on my own terms, and that alone gave me victory. That day, I realized that sometimes leaving is not losing, it is winning. Walking away, refusing to fight for a marriage built on deception, and protecting your dignity is a form of power that can't be taken from you. I stepped into my life fully aware, fully strong, and fully free, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. After leaving, I focused on rebuilding my life. I didn't rush into anything. I took time to understand what I wanted, who I wanted to be, and how I wanted to live. Slowly, I started making choices that reflected my values, my independence, and my sense of self. Every decision, no matter how small, was a reminder that I was no longer controlled by anyone else's rules or expectations. I found strength in simple routines, organizing my home, planning my days, and setting goals for my future. I surrounded myself with people who respected me and supported my growth. I learned to trust my instincts again, to speak my mind without fear, and to honor my own feelings first. Life was no longer about fitting into someone else's expectations, it was about living for myself. I didn't seek revenge in the traditional sense. I didn't want to humiliate Daniel or the Umuada, nor did I want to repay their manipulation with cruelty. I realized that my quiet victory was far stronger. By living truthfully, by setting boundaries, and by refusing to be controlled again, I had already won. My freedom and dignity were the consequences they could never take from me. Financial independence, emotional clarity, and peace became my measure of success. I could see how far I had come and how much stronger I had become through the challenges I had endured. The betrayal, humiliation, and attempts to control me no longer defined my life, they had taught me lessons I could carry forward. I had survived without losing myself, and that was the real triumph. There were moments when I remembered the pain, the quiet betrayal, the public embarrassment, the false apologies I had been forced to make. But instead of letting those memories hurt me, I let them remind me of my strength. I understood that the strongest revenge isn't about causing pain to others, it's about reclaiming your life and refusing to let anyone else dictate it again. As I moved forward, I embraced peace, clarity, and self-respect. I made plans for my future, pursued opportunities one had once been denied, and cultivated relationships that valued honesty and equality. I had reclaimed control over my life, and I no longer felt the need to prove anything to those who had tried to diminish me. Looking back, I understood the power of quiet strength. The challenges I faced could have destroyed me, but they didn't. They taught me patience, observation, and courage. I had turned betrayal into wisdom, humiliation into clarity, and control into freedom. Walking forward without looking back, I carried with me the knowledge that true power lies in refusing to be controlled and in living a life guided by your own choices. In the end, I didn't need revenge or punishment to feel victorious. I had won by taking back my life, by protecting my dignity, and by choosing myself above all else. That quiet victory was mine alone, and it was stronger than anything they could have imagined.